Interestingly enough, the more of an ability that you have to describe your feelings, the deeper and richer your feelings are going to become. Like anything else, a cave is just a cave. It's a mouth against a rock that you look at and you go, oh, there's a cave inside, and then you move on. But that cave becomes something way more when you go inside and you explore it. And you have to have a light, you have to have grappling hooks, you have to have things to help you explore that cave. And in the same way, you have to have a language to explore what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're going through. And you might think, wow, they're really selfish, they're really self-centered, they don't care. All you're saying is different words for that they're being human at a very basic level. To care about others, to have empathy, that has to be developed for a lot of people. It isn't a normal, natural thing. And so how would you know that? You aren't particularly empathetic or sympathetic. Well, you have to have the language to examine yourself. Every subject you study is going to be in language arts. If you're in the United States, you're taking English language arts, you're also taking chemistry. Chemistry is taught in English. And biology is taught in English. Physics, sociology, psychology. Whatever country you're in, that's the dominant language of that country, that's the language arts you should be studying. Because all of the subjects, your access to the rest of the world of ideas hinges on your ability to use that language. Your ability to access yourself, your own psyche, what's important to you, your value as a human being, to even discover you have value as a human being, only comes through your ability to access language. None of these things are intuitive. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Tell me why you're so special. You are, but without language, you'd never have the ability to explore yourself, to find out why you're so goddamn important. Not just on this planet, not just to the people around you, but to the actual physical structure of the universe. Is it that serious? Yes, if you have the language to understand it. You ever think about how hard that is, though? Like true communication? Like, what are some of the barriers that get in the way? What's that?
Language.
How do you mean language?
You said barriers to communication.
Yeah, so how do you mean language?
I mean, there's so many pieces of language you don't understand, and it's kind of hard to communicate with them.
Okay, so you mean like literally like English, German, French, Spanish, Swahili? Okay.
Should I be thinking deeper?
Well, there are other ways of thinking about it. I want to clarify. So for example, yesterday, I got a cheeseburger. I don't like onions. I think I've mentioned this before. I hate onions on cheeseburgers. And my cheeseburger had onions. I was very sad. Then I got home and I found out that my whole family had been slaughtered by a serial killer. And there were scary political messages written on the wall in their very blood, which he had chopped off their fingers and used a dip in the blood to write those messages on the wall. I was very sad. Was I sad in both cases? Yes. Was I sad? But does the same word really describe how I feel in both situations? No. And that's what I'm talking about with language. Because you can only think in a language that you've mastered. You can only explain yourself fully in a language that you've mastered. So if I were to ask you, how would you feel if you found that second scenario with your whole family killed by a serial killer? Well, I don't know, and then you're overwhelmed with it. That's the point. If you don't have the language to describe how you're feeling about a situation like that, and of course that's going to be an extreme situation, but if you don't have the language to explain a situation like that, now work your way back. When you're heartbroken, do you have the ability to explain that? When you're in love with somebody, do you have the ability to explain that? When you have some sentiment in you that kind of feels like love, but it's not, it's more like an infatuation, an excitement. Do you have the language to explain that? As a human being, you are incredibly complex. But think about how we'll use like one or two words to try to describe that whole gamut of all the things that you can feel. We'll use very basic words like sad, happy, love. This one's even a little more complex. Irritated, angry. And then that's usually where most of our languages stop in trying to describe how we feel about things. But I mean, your feelings are incredibly deep and rich. And interestingly enough, the more of an ability that you have to describe your feelings, the deeper and richer your feelings are going to become. Like anything else, a cave is just a cave. It's a mouth against a rock that you look at and you go, oh, there's a cave inside. And then you move on. But that cave becomes something way more when you go inside and you explore it. And you have to have a light, you have to have grappling hooks, you have to have things to help you explore that cave. And in the same way, you have to have a language to explore what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're going through. And so that's why I was asking you about language. Do you mean language like in terms of just like your ability to explain yourself? Or do you mean like, an actual language like English, Spanish, French, or whatever? And that's what makes communication so difficult, because let's say that you spend a bunch of time. Well, first off, by the way, how do you learn the ability to do that, to explain your feelings? Why? I can tell you one way, and most people are going to hate it, but it's the best way. Read. Read a lot from people who have learned how to do that. And then apply it. It's just like people ask, like, how do I improve my punctuation? How do I improve my grammar? You read. That's what you do. You just read. But is there a way to do it besides that? I suppose so. I can give you grammar exercises, but I mean, you can either do grammar exercises for an hour or read for an hour. And the reading is going to give you way more mastery of that stuff, because you're going to see how it's properly done. I mean, how is it that we learn how to speak? We listen to people around us. Makes sense. We imitate, and then we eventually make it our own. How is it that you learn how to use proper punctuation and grammar and all that? Well, you read. And then you start, in the same way, and then you start to make it your own. I mean, everything that you do that's going to become original starts with imitation. And this is how you learn language. This is how you learn how to behave. This is your mannerisms. A lot of you, I wonder if any of you are at that point yet where you recognize that your mannerisms are a lot like your parents. And if not, you will. You will. When I used to talk to the classes, I would always have a podium up here. And I would lean on the podium, and I sent it to one of my old professors from like my first year in college, and said, "Look, I'm a mini Mark Dollinger." That was one of my first professors. He's a history professor of mine, and he used to stand at the podium and lean on the podium, and he would ask questions like, "Was the New Deal really new?" Things like that. And if any of you guys go to San Francisco State, if you go there, and you go to the history department, and you find Mark Dollinger, and you tell him Dr. Scanlon sent you, he'll say, "Oh, what's the message?" And if you ask him, "Was the New Deal really new?" he will give you a box of pencils from all over the country. He collects pencils from every state he goes to. If you go to him and you ask him that, or one of his former students, he will give you a box full of pencils. Why? I don't know, it's just a box of pencils. It's just something you can do. And so, there's a second part on this, by the way. It's not just imitation. You also have to have the ability to understand what a person is saying. So there's a second part, which is not just your ability to express it. The other person has to have the ability to understand what you're saying. And so it's the language that you have to express it. But if your vocabulary is like 100 words, and you're talking to a person who has a vocabulary of 5, you're trying to, you're trying to pour a fire hose into a spout, They just won't understand. And that's one of the really difficult parts of it, is you have to be able to try to get people to understand what you're thinking and what you're feeling. So how then do you do that if they don't have the vocabulary that you have? Metaphor, figurative language, metaphors, similes, hyperbole. So why is it that we study vocabulary? To have a richer understanding of yourself, but also to be able to explain yourself to others, but also so that people can explain themselves to you. Now, when you don't have that ability, or there's some kind of a breakdown, there's like an imbalance in those two communication depths, what do? Well, you use figurative language. It's kind of like this. How are you feeling? It's kind of like this. It's kind of like that. You use metaphors, because everybody can understand those things if they've experienced something. How are you feeling right now? Oh, irritated. What does that mean? It's like when you, blah, 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 fill in the blank. It's like when you have a cut on you that you keep scratching, it gets worse and worse and worse, but you can't stop and it bothers you. Oh, I know what that's like. That's how I feel about you leaving your socks on the floor. or something. And then sometimes you can be so clear in what you say, and yet people simply don't understand you. Now, are you being clear? I don't know. That's kind of the life of a teacher, largely. I think I'm being so clear with you guys. And then I'll have like 2 people follow the directions. Now, I could sit back and go, well, 2 people followed them, so I was clear. The rest of you just weren't paying attention. Yeah, but isn't that kind of my job, though, as a teacher, is to find a way to bridge that, to make that work? The ones who are always paying attention, that's easy. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about like teaching in a college. That's easy. But finding a way to bridge that and get those things across, that's the hard part. That's advanced language. That's advanced language. But sometimes you think you're being clear also, by the way, because I've done this so many times. Like when I'm talking to you guys about Carl Jung, how many times have I taught Carl Jung? The hard part for me is that I teach it here, I teach it at the college, and I also teach it to PhD students. Now, obviously, I'm teaching very different things among those 3 levels. So having to understand who I'm talking to, understanding what's on the test, and trying to make sure, okay, I haven't talked about this yet. I talked about this the last 3 years. I'm trying to keep all of that stuff square. And then I have to hit you to a point where you're actually paying attention at a moment. That's all really tough to do. And by the way, that's not just as a teacher. That's you as a person too. You're talking to your friends. Are your friends paying attention to what you're saying, or are they waiting, are they waiting for their opportunity to speak? Do you guys have friends like that? They're not really listening. They're just waiting for their chance to chime in.
Yeah.
Or you have those friends who, when you're saying something, like, oh man, yesterday, I came home and found my whole family slaughtered by a serial killer. Oh my God, I know exactly. I was watching this documentary on serial killers, and oh my, it was so crazy. And then they just hijack the conversation, go in a completely different direction when you're trying to tell them how you feel. Yeah, that's where loneliness comes from. Loneliness doesn't come from having nobody around you. It comes from not being able to express the things that are important to you, and having a person or people around you who are willing to take that in, where you're almost just like a conduit for their life. And you might think, wow, they're really selfish. They're really self-centered. They don't care. All you're saying is different words for that they're being human at a very basic level. To care about others, to have empathy, that has to be developed for a lot of people. It isn't a normal, natural thing. And so how would you know that? You aren't particularly empathetic or sympathetic. Well, you have to have the language to examine yourself. It's all language. It's why I teach this. Why do I teach this and not other subjects? I'm qualified to do it. Why do I teach this thing specifically? I'll tell you why I teach English language arts. This is one of the only things I ever tell you I actually believe. I think it's the most important subject you can possibly take. Every subject you study is going to be in language arts. If you're in the United States, you're taking English language arts, you're also taking chemistry. Chemistry is taught in English. And biology is taught in English. Physics, sociology, psychology. Whatever country you're in that's the dominant language of that country, that's the language arts you should be studying. Because all of the subjects, your access to the rest of the world of ideas hinges on your ability to use that language. Your ability to access yourself, your own psyche, what's important to you, your value as a human being, to even discover you have value as a human being, only comes through your ability to access language. None of these things are intuitive. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Tell me why you're so special. I guess I'm, oh sorry, let me grab my elbow first. I guess I'm not. Yeah, you are. You are, but without language, you'd never have the ability to explore yourself, to find out why you're so goddamn important. Not just on this planet, not just to the people around you, but to the actual physical structure of the universe. Is it that serious? Yes, if you have the language to understand it. And the willingness to explore it. Not everybody does, and that's fine. That's fine. But think about that. How often do you think you communicate something? I had this conversation with somebody once. And I called them, and we were going to see each other. And I called this person, and I said, I'm not going to be able to make it, but I'm going to be able to make it for, I was going to tell them that I'll be there in a few weeks out of town. There's an out-of-town friend. And I said, I'm not going to be able to make it this week, but in next month, I'm gonna be there for like 3 weeks. Before I ever got a chance to say that, she turned to me and she said, I can't talk to you right now. And she hung up. So what does that tell me? She don't want to talk to me. And then she hung up. So when will I talk to her? If you're me, when will I talk to her? Big shoulder shrug. I don't know. I go back about my life. In her mind, when am I supposed to talk to her? I'm supposed to call back. What's wrong? That's not me. That's not me. I've gotten a couple of snarky messages from this person, but nothing more than that. Dude, what was I conveying to this person? I want to talk to you. I called you. When you hung up on me, first off, it's disrespectful, but incredibly disrespectful, by the way. To me, that's one of the worst things you can do to a person is hang up on them. It's just like one of the worst things you can do to a person is say, I don't care what you have to say, and walk away, because what you have to say is an expression of your being. That person, when they reject what you have to say, just outright don't want to hear it, they don't want to hear about you as a human being. Is it that deep? Maybe not, but to me it is. And so I figured if this person wanted to talk to me, what would they do? Call me back. Because I made a phone call. That person, however, is probably sitting there saying, well, if he wanted to talk to me, he'd call me, right? Have we communicated? No. Now, I understand the communication, of course, but we haven't communicated and we haven't talked. Does it suck? Yeah. Miss the person? Yeah. Enough to call? No, because I also respect the wishes. You hang up, you hang up. You end the being, you end the being. But if they ever called me, especially if they called me and they're like, hey, bro, so look, I'm in jail. I need somebody. Yeah, I'm there for you. No problem. I'll drive over there. But communication doesn't always happen when you think it does, and it doesn't always happen in the ways that you think it does. Oh, and by the way, even if we get our language straight, even if we get our analogies straight, metaphors, similes, man, there's always that physical one, because it's the body language that also conveys. So we have to have a lot of things, man, that are firing on the right cylinders in order to understand each other. And very often it's just like the tunes aren't fitting the chords, man. Things are just not lining up. That's why when you find somebody who you can communicate with, that is great, man. That's where the full actual you, the essence of your being, can manifest. In other words, you can enter the world. The full you never enters the world until you express yourself. I'll say more about that later. But the full you never enters the world until you're able to express yourself. By speaking, you literally change the physical fabric of the universe. Literally. Not figuratively, literally. And so when you speak yourself, when you talk about what you really believe, you're changing the physical universe because you're entering into it. And when you lie and you manipulate, you're changing the physical universe for the worse. You're distorting it, you're perverting it. Is it that deep? Yeah, it actually is. But you have to have the language to explore that. So, study language, if for no other reason to be a better mechanic, to be a better biologist, to be a better human being, ultimately, at the deeper levels. So at least to know yourself, to know if you are that. So, questions, comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques? Hey, believe this or not, I was not going to talk today because you guys have that quiz today on Jung.